John Asquith, Chairman of the Community Environment Network,
Yes,
and
sir.
also the Marine Discovery Centre.
Yep.
Big jobs, big future jobs for our community.
Yep.
Can we talk about how you got there? You know,
Yeah, sure,
it's never smooth.
It's never smooth. Well, I guess I've been involved in the community sector virtually since childhood. You know, I mean, my parents were very regular churchgoers in those days, and I guess, you know, I along with most of my family has since faded. But I guess those years, you know, as a boy starting high school, I certainly recall going to many, you know, and helping with church activities. So we'd have sales, you know, we'd go around with the men collecting firewood, people, because, you know, in the 50s.
It's a real community.
Yeah, that's right. It was a real community. People didn't have much money. Certainly in the 50s they didn't. And
were you up here at that stage?
No, I was in Sydney, Western Sydney.
Right.
Yep, I grew up in. And so we'd go along, you know, the kids would go along and help collect the firewood and the other things that we do. So I guess that got me started on community stuff, and so I've been involved in it virtually all my life as a volunteer in some sort of community organisation. I've been in surf clubs, been in social clubs. I guess once I became an adult, and after I did university late, so I was a tradesman, I was an electrician. I went to uni, I went back to night school to do my HSC, then went on to do a degree, and I graduated as an engineer at about 31 years of age, right? So by then having a family and so on. But I guess the commitment and the belief in involvement with the community was always something that was a strong ethic with me. So I was in a surf club in my early 20s. Yeah, a lot of that faded when I went into study.
Study and family.
Study and family. You don't get a lot of time, do you?
They steal a lot of time from you.
Yeah.
No, they don't. They donate a lot of time to you.
So they are a good experience in your life.
Indeed. Yeah.
So, and then I guess I got involved in conservation organisations.
Did you have an engineering job at that stage, or?
Yeah, look, I became an engineer when I graduated, so I was 31 when I graduated. Prior to that, you know, I was electrician, draftsman, technical officer type jobs, where I was still studying or doing certificate courses in you know, electrical engineering of one sort and another. So yeah, I started to have those jobs, you know, I guess in my around about the, let's say the 20 mark was when I was you know, doing various things like social clubs and surf clubs, and then that all faded with marriage and young children and uni. And then in my 30s, I started to get back into it after I graduated.
Yeah.
Yep. So
I hesitate to say proper job, because right now you have two extraordinarily proper jobs.
Yeah, the volunteer's job is never done.
Are both of those voluntary?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're 100% voluntary. One of the things I often compare dates with people who are at a similar stage to myself is the qualifications for some of these jobs is lots of enthusiasm, lots of good experience, and management training is helpful, and then a preparedness to give both time and money as necessary to make the thing work, right?
And you left a fourth one out, which is an incredibly thick skin, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Because you're an easy target.
Oh, you're a big target, yeah. From all sorts of... In what you find is in organisations, and I know surf clubs, cricket clubs suffer from this as much as environmental organisations, is that there's a lot of jealousies. So success, you know, is seen as a challenge to people. Other people don't. It's not everyone, but
is that changing? Are you seeing less of that, or the more success? Well,
I'm getting better at handling it. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
you know, I know how to deflect it now, and so very much I have to be really careful how I manage situations, because it can come back to bite me, and I have had some. Because
volunteer chairmen are working with volunteer organisations.
That's it, and you've got to, you know, volunteers don't want to hear bad news. They want to be positive about what they're doing. You know, they believe they're going to make a difference in the environment or whatever they're doing. You know, helping old people, Meals on Wheels.
Well, let's talk about the community environment network,
Yep.
because that's the other is a relatively new role.
Yep, sure.
The vision you have for that organisation.
Yep.
And
well,
bearing in mind our audience here is business people who are looking for,
Yep.
we trust, opportunities to participate in what you do.
Yeah, sure.
As a supporter or...
Yeah, well, look, very much so. Coming from a management and an engineering background, but all the time carrying through my environmental interests. So I've had a long record of being an office bearer in environmental organisations, and so then the Community Environment Network in 1999, I was asked to take over as chairman of that organisation.
Was it a relatively new organisation?
Yeah, it's only just formed, and it was suffering from the issues that come around new organisations, and that is whether you go one way or you fade, or you drop down. You're finding your level.
Yep.
And I've done lots of restructuring and setting up business units and one thing and another, and it's exactly the same process. What you've got to have is a clear idea of where you want to go, and then start putting the things in place to do that. And it's very easy at that stage because the people who get organisations started have a particular range of skills.
Indeed.
My range of skills is the next bit.
The consolidation in a lot of
I
ways.
can consolidate organisations.
So where were your priorities in the early 2000s?
Well, we were, the CN was formed with something that I really liked, which was a mission of sustainability, essentially. And at that time, sustainability was a relatively new concept, but it was clearly defined, and so I could see this is something I could really take somewhere, because we were able to develop lots of partnerships. CN would deal with hundreds of different organisations on an annual basis now, from councils to NGOs to state governments to businesses to all sorts of educational institutions.
What's your role? Are you an advisor? Your vision is for sustainability. So you're offering what to them?
Yep. So let's say in the case of businesses, well, we set up a project in about 2003-04, which was to encourage sustainable business on the Central Coast. So I got a little bit of funding, which enabled me to employ someone to do the project work, and we set up a group called the Sustainable Business Network, which we've still got running, but it's got a very minor role now. And the idea was to go out and promote with businesses and government opportunities that we could see were coming in sustainability. And if you think about then, in the mid-2000s, what were we going through? We're going through a drought. We were the usual employment issues on the coast. And so it seemed to me we had a great opportunity to, just installing water tanks on every house on the Central Coast would be a huge, at that, economic generator, and we never had a better reason to do it.
Yeah.
So there's roughly, on our calculation, 100,000 plus dwellings on the Central Coast that are already built, right? And they all need, a sustainable water supply. They can be retrofitted for sustainable energy things. So, dare I say it, pink bats, as well as, energy efficient devices and so on, are all opportunities. And when you do the math from them, you don't have to put many houses in front of many dollars in front of a multiplier like 100,000 to end up with some very big numbers, and to see how you could really make some real changes to employment on the coast, business opportunity, and provide some avenues for young people to learn skills that they could take elsewhere, and it's setting you up for the future. We saw that this stuff of carbon tax, etc., that we're now just going through, has been talked about for in excess of 20 years. I first came across it in about 1990 when I was in industry, and they were horrified. How are we going to handle it? What are we going to do about it? Oh no, it's our fault, because they were big carbon dioxide producers. And what we've now come to understand, in 20 years we've made some progress, but we really haven't put in really serious drivers to change things,
So just on that, that carbon tax, the presumption is you are a supporter.
Oh yeah.
Is it being handled the right way, do you think?
Look, it's complicated. The way, by using market mechanisms and the way it's being done, it is complicated, and there's not a very good selling job going on with it. You know, the arguments that are prevailing would almost give people to believe that there is doubt in the scientific community. There is virtually no doubt in the scientific community. There's only doubt amongst the, you know, people who you'd call our opinion leaders, right? Who have no skills or qualifications in the area, but in the scientific community, they're seeing it all the time, you know, and are terrified by some of what they're seeing, you know.
Okay, sorry. So you've got that. No, I kind of took you off that track. With regard to moving forward, that you've got the opportunity to look at communities and say, okay, 100,000 unit dwellings, we can change that.
Yep.
Do you see, what's your challenge in the next 2 or 3 years for those 100,000?
Well, I guess at that time, we're because we're an NGO, we're largely trying to influence the opinions and the strategies of what's happening, not actually doing it, because at the end of the day, we have very little in the way of resources, you know. So the resource we add is the one that works with networks and ideas and that sort of thing, you know.
Personal passion.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
And creates that atmosphere and tries to challenge what we see as, you know, bad things that are happening that are contrary to sustainability. You don't find many people who are against the idea of sustainability, you know. In fact, I'd have to say I've never heard one, you know. And I get lots of people telling me, oh, you know, I might be in this party, but I'm actually closet green, you know. I'm on your side, you know.
The challenge is how green.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Well, it's the same challenge that we see all the time. It's not getting people to understand what should happen. It's getting the behavioural change that will start to make it happen. So we can talk to people and you see attitude surveys and all the rest where they say 100% the right thing. When you then say, well, look, you now need to actually do something to you know, you have to sort your garbage in the garbage bin. Well, you can wander around Terrigal, say, shopping centre or any shopping centre on the coast, and just look at how sorted the garbage tins are. You know, and so
behaviour doesn't match attitude.
Behaviour doesn't match attitude, not even faintly. You know, and that's where I think the challenge is for organisations like ours is to get people to do that behavioural change. And sometimes they don't know how to do it. Sometimes they forget about it. You know, and so you do have to be a bit of a nag sometimes. But in doing that, you want to keep them on side. So you've got to be a positive, encouraging, and friendly nag. And this is one of the things I talk to my group a lot about, is that whether you're dealing in the political sphere or with the public, you need to get people on your side.
Yeah. Talking about that and people, do you have business people coming in and saying, okay, I want to be a member of the Community Environment Network?
There are some. There's not a lot. We have a sustainable business network which businesses can join, you know, because you enjoy join CN as either an individual or a not-for-profit group. Right. So we really don't have the only way a business would join was as a member. You know, the same as anyone else. We have had applications like that. What we do is say to them, look, fill out, we have a little survey on the Sustainable Business Network, which, you know, basically says, you know, I try to minimise my use of energy and I use local goods and produce and da-da-da-da-da. And yeah, you know, they dribble in probably one a month an application to join. We check it out because what we're looking for is we're very wary of greenwash. So greenwash is very common in society now.
What greenwash
is
this
spin,
deep and
it is spin to make something that is clearly not in the interests of the environment sound like it is.
Okay.
Now, there's a really good one out at the moment. Brooklyn sewage treatment plant, right? The intention of the operators of that plant is to increase the sewage that's discharged into the Hawkesbury River.
It's very current.
Very current. Yeah, just, you know. Now, but that's not the way their report reads. Their report reads that they want to reduce the energy footprint of the sewage plant by using less energy in the sewage treatment process and therefore putting out more pollution. Right?
Is
That's
it also
greenwash? That's a classic. That's a good example.
And they're also avoiding upgrades and maintenance as
And
well on the way through.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's a greenwash. Now I know what a greenwash is.
That's
yes.
that's a really good or bad example.
So what's your role in that? Is it to vocalise?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Okay.
So we our organisation, the Marine Centre does no advocacy work. It's purely educational. The CN does the advocacy work. The chair of CN is a spokesperson, and the reason for that is to protect the members and supporters, etc. So I take the flak.
One voice.
But I speak on behalf of the organisation, so and I might not necessarily agree with what the organisation decides to promote. I mean, I won't, within limits, but that's what I'll put out there. And so in the case of that, I take the role very much of helping to form the public opinion.
And you'd be talking to the oyster farmers and the fishermen.
I've got a really good chemical engineer who knows these plants inside out, and he's dismayed at what's going on there.
With regards to the Marine Centre, an exciting educational...
Oh, brilliant project, I guess for CN and the Marine Centre, there's two projects that in my dotage that I'm sort of settling on. One is I coordinate a program called Land for Wildlife, which works with private landholders across New South Wales to put aside some of their land for conservation. So it's purely a gentleman's agreement, and so I travel around the state doing that. And the Marine Centre is all about promoting education for families, the community and schools and universities in marine science and marine education. So they're both brilliant projects because they're incredibly positive.
Who funds the Marine Centre?
The Marine Centre? Well, I guess we do. We're in a partnership with the University of Newcastle. They give us some sponsorship. We have a small entry fee and donations, etc. So between that gives us enough to cover our costs, electricity bills, etc. Chase grants to improve displays, and CN has basically been taking the slug, I guess, from time to time where we've had to lay out money, to the air conditioning, went sideways at one stage. So they take the hit, and then the Marine Centre gradually pays them back.
You mentioned your dotage, but I think you're a fairly active doter, if that's the grammatically correct position. So what's the next 12 months look like for each of those organisations? For the
it's always challenging in the not-for-profit sector because you are reliant on donations. We do a few contracts, grants, and so your funding sources are uncertain, and because of that they can vary widely. If you get a big grant for say building work versus a small grant for other things, but so there's a lot of uncertainty about the finances. So what you have to do is work out what your absolute core is. That's the way I do it, and make sure we've got that covered for some time into the future. So know what your core is, and it's probably the same as any business does. They know,
especially now.
Yeah, that's right. With
Indeed.
the GFC and so on around, you've got to be able to, adjust to, and you've got to be able to do those adjustments without taking big hits. So that's the first thing. But I guess what we're seeing in the community environment network in their area, what I think we will see is more issues around things like pollution and water and that sort of thing, because that is there's a sort of a backsliding going on in that area, and
what's causing that backsliding or that dropping of visibility, I guess?
I think it's complacency with time. So the Clean Waters Act, which was a revolution in New South Wales, came in 1963. So before that, you could...
Anything in the water.
Anything. And Sydney Harbour used to be black. I've seen photos of it, just oily all around the shipping, just filthy. So we've come a long way, but now people have forgotten, the people who were around when the water was black, there's not a lot of them alive, or not a lot of them who remembered or had an interest. So that, people forget what it's like if you have raw sewage going into your streams or oil, or people just aren't responsible for discharges, And at the same time, there's been a continual pressure by governments to cut their costs. So that means they don't have pollution inspectors around like they used to, because they've got, and that's good if people, live up to their part of the bargain, So there's a general complacency, and you get a slow slide backwards on that. In the other thing that's happening is the other tension, I guess, in the environmental area is the natural, so the trees and birds and the animals, which, we term sort of the biodiversity side of the equation. You can see that, that's sort of a bit of a tilt coming back from that, because I think what's happening is there's less DAs going through, so there's less development pressure on land, so there's less clearing, and if there's less clearing, then this particular bag of tricks is not under pressure, but this bag of tricks is.
Okay.
So I think that's what's happening. On the marine side, look, we hope to see a lot of opportunities coming there, because it's now going into more schools as part of a high school HSC subject. The Adelaide's gone down, so we're now starting to see the science happen on that, and we're starting to get various anecdotal reports, but next year we'll start to see, we think, some published information about what's actually happening on the Adelaide, and we're hopeful that we'll ride on the back of the Adelaide a bit, but the Adelaide will become a thing the Central Coast is known for, because of the science that goes on around it, not only the diving side of it.
Does business engage with that science side? We've talked to the university and
a little bit, but not a lot, I've talked to a couple of businesses that I know of up here that do water quality monitoring or sell scientific equipment, and what have you. There's not, there's not a lot of engagement on the Adelaide. We were also hopeful of when the Adelaide was originally going to be sunk, we had an IT company interested in sort of real-time monitoring of the Adelaide, and that would have been a world first. Now that went off the boil and hasn't come back onto the boil, because when you lose momentum on these things, GFCs come in and suddenly all sorts of
we find other things to do with
the
limited
that's right.
Okay.
Other forces are at work.
Yeah.
So but I'm very optimistic. I think the Marine Centre over the next decade will be really a significant be a thing the Central Coast is known for. When you're up here on your holidays, you can go there. There's entertainment, and interesting things to do. Lots of interesting exhibits.
It's lifting its profile for the Central Coast schools as well. So
that's right.
I mean,
at the same time, they're coming up. So there's the tourism side, the educational side of the community, and the schools. So we think, and the research. We've now got 2 students working out of the office that are under the university's control, doing some research, and so we've got it's coming together well. But the next couple of decades, I think, we would like to see Terrigal, and the Adelaide, I guess, that sort of ocean-based approach, and then eventually we'd like to see something on the other half of the Central Coast, Wyong, that's focused on the inlet, on the lakes and estuary type environments, and does a similar thing, because we think there is enough there to do it, but as a not-for-profit where you're relying on this patchy income, then obviously that'll depend on
your time span is decades, not years.
Yeah. We're looking at a decade to really see it, up where we want it to be.
John, you've got a seat at the table with some of our strategic planning groups, the manufacturing group, and your role there is one of advisor, supporter, or
largely advisor, supporter. We have great difficulty servicing that role, because it and the interest in it grew out of the Sustainable Business Network and the project we did, where we sat down and we said, if we had a sustainable Central Coast, what would it look like? What would it look like? And it's quite an interesting exercise to go through, and so we had to actually identify small areas and say, look, what would that do? Because if you try to think about the whole thing,
Well, you've got 100,000 dwellings, haven't you? And
That's
the impact
right.
of 320,000 people.
That's right, and they'd make all, they're commuters, they're fish, they're all sorts of things, So it's very hard. So what you've got to do is break it into bits and start to identify it. So so with the Manufacturing Connect, look, I'm a strong supporter of that because it's local employment. If they're into, let's say, making solar cells or tanks or whatever, where we've actually built up the skills by by servicing our local economy, there's some real opportunities there, and that's probably coming through now by bigger forces like the carbon tax will drive a whole lot of things in that area, and we do have a number of people on the coast who are quite innovative.
When you talk about the difficulty in servicing that relationship, that just comes down to money, I'm presuming.
Yeah, that's right. A staff person or someone.
A researcher, or is it a manager's role or
no,
a researcher's role?
It's more a well, not quite. It's better than a gopher's role. It's really someone who's got understands it, so they need to understand sustainability, but are comfortable going around and talking to businesses and helping them to save energy, and to building a partnership. So you've got to have people who have an understanding of sustainability and good communication skills, and really that's what you're after. Yeah. I had funding for it for a couple of years, and then the funding went, and I, went around with the hat everywhere, but I couldn't get it. So all we've been able to do since is we, are on a few of these boards and committees, etc., and we run the Sustainable Business Network, which is essentially a website, where people can join. We'll put their details up. We used to run ads in our newsletter when we were doing a newsletter, but we had to cut that out.
Is this a test of our commitment to sustainability? If RDA doesn't have funds or can't locate funds for the sustainable future, then really, is it real?
Look, I guess events have overtaken us. There are people now working up out of the RDA office who are working on this particular area now. So that's sort of at the time when we wanted to push it, which I guess is up till about 2 or 3 years ago when it wasn't, hugely on the agenda. But since then, there is I've forgotten his name, but there's an officer working up there in the office next to Anthony, who's, working with Manufacturing Connect and trying to get them into sustainability, etc. So,
well, it's not excellent, but it's a move forward.
Yeah, that's right. So government has taken on that role, but that's not the ideal from my point of view, because we, like I was saying to you before, and the Marine Centre deal with a lot of people, not just government. And what we find is if you're not from the government, you can establish very good relationships with people. A handshake can mean something, right? So if you say, look, I'll do that and you do that, you can't do that with government. You can never do that with government, right? Because at the end of the day, the person may not control the policy. You might be able to do it with the Premier, but from there down, even there, it's probably a bit dodgy. So being able to do it outside of government gives you a lot more flexibility, and so that's how we were able to have the successes we were with. We've got about 100 businesses, I think, on the website, who support the Sustainable Business Network. But yeah, I think it would have gone a lot further, But that's
Business Insider might need to get on that and maybe work with you. So
yeah, sure. Look, we'd be happy to. To us, there are just so many opportunities now because a lot of things that have actually been forced offshore. Australia's had so much technology gone overseas in the last 5 years. That started. Some of it here, some up in Newcastle. That's now being pumped out of China, those designs, and in Sydney.
Probably leads to the next question, John, and that is, we give you the opportunity for a rant.
Right.
And as long as you're gentle now, I don't want you to embarrass anyone.
You're right.
And I know I don't need to say that.
Yep.
Tell me, you look around the Central Coast in your specific areas, and one or two things may get up your nose, and you wish you could change. What would they be?
I guess, look, because of my engineering and management background, I'm always I guess, very sceptical when I look at how public money is used, you know, and I look at and I think, well, how can we do that? We could have done that better. And so I'd have to say that I think we're not good on the Central Coast at spending money wisely, I don't think, you know. We're currently in for, you know, there's lots of money around for big projects, infrastructure funding, you know, high-speed trains, all sorts of things. We're yet to really focus on what we want on the Central Coast, you know.
Do we know what we want on the Central Coast?
We know, well, we have a wish list, but a wish list isn't the same, you know. What I'm talking, and I think it's where you're leading, is what we want needs to be more focused, and it needs to have, it needs to be driven by things other than, oh, if we can get, you know, another level of government to pay for that, we don't have to then. You know, it needs to be driven by, you know, a broad look at the public interest. And what you know, the Central Coast is very, you know, parochial, you know, sub-parochial, I guess you'd almost say, you know, villages around the waterways.
We agree totally, yeah.
Yeah, so that's our big difficulty on the coast, is getting that focus. And for, you know, I find it's very hard from the sector I'm with, the NGOs, to really inspire levels of government to, you know, support what we're doing above and beyond what they want to do, you know, and that rarely is a regional approach. You know, we look at ourselves as we're Terrigal, but we want to be, you know, we see our aspiration is to be regional.
Yeah, and this is, I'll regret saying it is a regional approach you're doing this. We have two local governments.
Yeah.
Would it be better if we had one, or can they work together?
Look, they have great difficulty working together. Like, let me put it to you this way: they you know, try to work together, but when the rubber hits the road, and the test of it is when the money's around that could be spent on, say, a road in Warrnambool or a road at West Gosford. Guess which one will come up 1 and 2?
Yeah.
They'll both be one for the relevant government, local government, right? So I think the Central Coast has either got to come back to one local government area or go to 5 local government areas. You know, the trouble is what we've got now is the area split in half, and there's a classic one that you know, we had a talk about just recently, in that both local government areas want an arts complex. You know, performing arts centre down here, and one up in Wyong. I think the one in Gosford is you know, it's 80 million or something. The one up in Wyong's 40 or 25. Heaps of money, right? Big money for the Central Coast, where, you know, a project down here that's a couple of million is a big project in general. You know, there's not a lot of money around. It's not that sort of area. There, you know, those two projects have yet to come together as one regional arts complex. They say they do different things, and so while ever they're like that, we are not going to get any money to do either one. So everyone's a loser, you know. So yeah, I think the basic problem is this, and you know, we've either got to have one local government or 5, so that, you know, and then the 5's enough that there's not mine and yours, you know. And the Hunter is a classic example of how well this worked. I think there must be about 10 local government areas in the Hunter Valley.
But they say that model is one of cooperation. So perhaps with 5, they are forced into cooperation even further, rather than having 2 quite strong.
They're 2 of the biggest councils in New South Wales. They have enormous budgets with water, you know, and yeah, so that it's just not an
opportunity
model
for us all.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Done?
John Asquith, well, thank you.
Yeah, sure, that's my pleasure.